This exercise is the banded leg swings. It's another one from the leg series, and you're going to need a resistance loop. If you don't have one of these handy loops, then any old resistance band will do, just tied in the appropriate circumference. You want to place the resistance loop around your ankles, and they want to be fairly low down. So once you've got it on, it's just always good to try and smooth it out. And when your feet are hip width apart, you want to feel like there's modest tension on the thing already. So just bear that in mind if you're tying your resistance band together. Now, with this exercise, it's going to test your balance if you do it in the kind of purest form. So just at the opposite, what I'll say is, if you find that your balance is really compromised in this, you can still get great benefit by holding on to something. It's an exercise which is going to target lots of the proximal hip muscles in conjunction with your core stability and balance, but there's workarounds if you find that you are having difficulty with this. Now, the basic movements are going to take our legs into 3 planes of movement. So you want to take your weight onto one leg, and that's going to be your balancing leg, and then find your balance point. So you just kind of bring that other leg to a point where the knees come forwards, so you've got your knees slightly bent, and the big toe is just about to leave the deck. Here, make sure that your shoulders are level, make sure that your torso and spine are neutral, because a lot of people will take their foot off the floor and kind of naturally lean away. That's not a pattern we want to cement. We want to be cushioned in that standing leg, we want to be neutral and supported throughout. Now, the first movement is taking your hip into a movement known as flexion. So from here, once you've just lifted the toe off the floor, draw the knee and thigh forwards to bring that thigh up, and that's called hip flexion. So you lift up into resistance and then go down to tap the floor again, and we're going to do that 5 times. Now, to start with, just getting a feel for the resistance and the nature of the band, just do these movements relatively slowly and controlled, and coming back down to touch. Once you've done your 5 forwards, we're now going to move into abduction, moving away from the body. So again, find your balance point, make sure you're level and centered, and then out to the side and back. And here's our second set of 5, if you will, the second set of banded hip swings. Now, when you're doing any of these movements, you're looking for that kind of purity of Pilates and that dissociation of movement. I'll touch on that more in a second. The final level is moving into hip extension. It might be easier if I turn sideways for this one. So you take, again, the balance onto one side, and then the knee is bent for this, so that as you move backwards, you're extending the hip. And again, you're doing 5 of these swings, these banded swings, and then coming back to neutral. Now, even doing it at that slow pace, you might find that you're a little bit wobbly, and if you're unable to maintain that equity in the shoulders and that balance, just hold on to a countertop chair, whatever it might be, so you can get that same targeting of the hip muscles, but you've just got that little bit of support that you need. Now, that is quite a slow pace. It's quite a nice one to do, but if you're using this more as a warm-up pre-run, or you want a little bit more of a challenge, then we just up the pace a little bit and also increase the challenge for the dissociation of movement by not touching down at any point. So take the weight onto one leg, and then we're going to do those 3 sets of 5, but a little bit pacier with no break between them. So find your balance point, engage your center, make sure you're balanced, and then it's 5 forwards, 5 side, 5 back. A little bit quicker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, side, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then back, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, as well as the balance challenge with this one, a lot of people will find that it's a struggle to dissociate the movements purely. So the things to look out for on each set. With the flexion, you tend to find if you're going to go anywhere, that you're going to curl up. And you see people kind of bringing the head down and curving the chest. We want to mimic what's happening when we're running. Up, tall, carrying the body well. And so it's up to you to gauge how much resistance you're moving into and how much hip flexion you're generating to be able to offset that. When it comes to the abduction, the second of the 5, it's kind of linked to what I said earlier. A lot of people will find they do this, or they'll be leant over to start with and use their upper body as a counterbalance over the fulcrum of the remaining leg. We don't want that. That's not a good look when you're running. So if you find that you're just too wobbly or you're really struggling, you can use your other arm as a counterbalance And that can just give you a little bit of assistance, and then you can gradually bring that arm down as you practice. But make sure that you're not having any upper body lean when you're performing that. Last up is the hip extension. Because we're naturally quite limited into true hip extension, what will tend to happen, and it's indeed a natural physiological partner to hip extension, is anterior tilt of the pelvis and therefore lumbar spine extension, arching. A little bit of that's fine, and indeed is natural and happens when you're running. You don't have a fixed spine when you're running, nor should you. But on this one, if you're trying too hard, you're going to find that the pelvis forcefully dips forwards, the back forcefully arches, and again, that's something which we want to try and avoid because it can give rise to some problems. So think about your Pilates principles here. Think about pulling the belt line and rib cage together slightly, getting that isometric, that static contraction of the abdominal wall. And just for the sake of this exercise, you can then get better hip extension movement and simultaneously work your core stabilizers as well. Now with the knee bent, it means that you're not really going into too much, if any, hip extension beyond neutral with the thigh. And that's why the knee stays bent. If you try and do this with the legs straight, to get that clearance, you're going to find that you're really having to get into hot water with the arching of the back here. So with the hip circles, just make sure that you're balanced, that the form is good up top, and that you're thinking about those potential pitfalls when it comes to trying to dissociate the movement. It's a great pre-run warm-up, this one, but also in its own right, lovely core stability training and balance training if you're using it as part of a separate routine.